Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Never Thirst Again. I'm your podcast host, Chrissy Smith, and boy, do I have a good one for you today. I'm so excited that you guys have decided to join because I want to talk to you a little bit about the word grace. What is grace? Right? A lot of people have looked up the definition of grace, and one of the first definitions that you would see is where it basically defines it as courteous goodwill. Now, while that may be true, the type of grace that I'm talking about is kind of what Reverend J. Patrick Street describes as God's life, power, and righteousness given to us by unmerited favor. I really like that definition. It also goes on to say that it's the kind of grace that transforms our hearts and renews our mind in such a way that the effect from coming in close contact with this kind of favor can last a lifetime. Now, it's the kind of grace that when we experience certain things that happen to us or that we might cause to happen, things that we do that are out of character, right? For someone who has identified themselves as one of God's children, you find yourself asking questions like, was it worth it? Should I have done that? All too often, we do see or find ourselves in a place of longing for certain things in life, whether it be things like friends or money, houses. Other times we can find ourselves longing for things that are a little less tangible, like joy, balance, or even love for that matter. This type of thing can actually happen as a child or as an adult. And this actually brings me to a time where, when I think back to when I was about maybe 6 years old, I was in first grade at the time, and boy, I had the best teacher. Oh, I loved my first grade teacher. Each week, she'd pull a student's name from her cup, and that student would have to bring in something special for show and tell. You remember show and tell, right? Of course. Well, back then, that was something that every child in her class looked forward to. It was the one chance that you got to bring in something really special that meant a great deal to you. I mean, many of the students would bring in things like pictures that they'd taken on family trips or favorite teddy bears and even beautiful seashells that they might have found along the beaches. Now, to a first grader, it was one of the small opportunities that you got to share something truly unique about yourself in hopes that the rest of the class would know just how special you are. And they would actually think that you're special too, right? Well, the day that my teacher finally pulled my name from her yellow cup with the little daisies painted on the sides, I remember sitting on the big red carpet in front of her. I was so excited, and I couldn't wait to bring in my special item to share with the class. So throughout the remainder of the day, I was planning and practicing exactly how I wanted to present my item for show and tell to the class the next day. When I got home, I couldn't wait to tell my mom about it. Sensing my excitement, she was excited for me. She knew that I had been waiting for this. So that night after dinner, after I had picked out the perfect outfit and gently placed my doll right beside my book bag, I was set. I couldn't wait to share Cricket with the rest of the class. She was a life-sized doll that sang and moved her head, and she was pretty special to me. Well, I knew the other girls would want to hold her and ask me if there was anything else that she did. In my eyes, Cricket was pretty awesome. So, I barely got any sleep that night because I was so excited about the next day. However, when I finally did wake up for school that morning, I felt absolutely horrible. sore throat, achy body, and a high fever had taken its toll on my little body. I stayed home for 3 days straight, just trying to make sure that I was well enough to go back to school. Now, I was ready to go back just so that I could present cricket to my class. Needless to say, though, I was absolutely heartbroken. I had missed my opportunity to show my class one of the things that I thought made me so special. When I finally got well enough to go back to school, my teacher had said, "Chrissy, we're so glad you're feeling better. But listen, I know you were supposed to do your show and tell on last Tuesday, but since we weren't sure when you'd be back, I let someone else stand in for today, and you can have your spot on next Tuesday, okay?" To be honest, for a second, I almost didn't answer her. I could feel the lump welling up in my throat. I wanted to burst into tears because I didn't want to wait another week to share cricket with my class. Nevertheless, though, I answered her with a slow and unenthusiastic "yes, ma'am." That day, as my class and I gathered onto the big red carpet, I watched as a very excited little brown-haired girl walked up to the front of the classroom and pulled out her object. She could barely contain herself as she showed the class her colorful beaded necklace that she'd crafted with her mother over the summer. She told the class how it was special to her because it was something that she had learned how to do and she was really good at it. I was in awe of the necklace. It was filled with brightly colored beads of pinks, reds, oranges, and many other colors that made my eyes grow wide with envy. Everybody wanted a necklace like that. I wanted that necklace. I was no longer listening to a word that she was saying. Once she had finished, though, my teacher gave her a great big hug and told her exactly how proud she was of her. That was supposed to be my hug, I thought to myself. I watched as she walked over to the cubbies and gently placed the necklace over the coat hook that also held her book bag. "And that's supposed to be my necklace," I said to myself. All day long, I thought about how to get my hands on that necklace. I waited until the end of the school day when I knew that there was usually a great deal of commotion with all the students packing up and getting ready to go home. No one would actually see me take the necklace, right? So I plotted and I succeeded. When the administrator came over the loudspeaker and announced the bus numbers for loading, I quietly walked over to the cubbies and quickly snatched the necklace from the hook. I shoved it in my pocket and lined up at the door with the other students whose bus numbers had also been called. As I stood there, I saw the little brown-haired girl walk to her cubby and gather her things, but she was frantic. I could hear her telling the teacher, "I don't know where it is. I sat it right here on this hook and it's not there anymore." Her cheeks began to turn red and the tears flowed endlessly. I was crushed. I felt horrible. I immediately wanted to take back what I had done, apologize, and ask for her forgiveness. Want to know what happened though? I never said a word. This same little girl and I went all the way through high school together, shared classes, and even got accepted to the same university. She even ended up being my roommate during that first semester. Throughout all that time, I think about the incident periodically and tried to get up enough courage to tell her what had happened. I never did. At this point, too much time had passed, and I was so embarrassed. My pride wouldn't let me apologize, but my heart wouldn't let me forget it. We both graduated and went on to live our lives, of course, but I remember one day actually praying to God about it. I had promised him that if I ever see her again, I'd tell her what really happened and that I'd be very intentional about asking for her forgiveness. Now, how many of you know that God will absolutely hold you to your word? He never forgets. To move forward, though, this year came in with a bang, to say the least. It was actually a few weeks ago, a full 32 years after the whole memory of the necklace, that I ran into her at one of the local hospitals. I happened to be visiting my mother at the time, and while I was in her room, there came a knock on the door. When the person walked through, I gasped, "Oh my goodness! Katie! Hi, how are you?" I asked. "Hey!" was her response. "Chrissy, you are not going to believe this, but I kept looking at your mother's name on my charts because I knew her name sounded familiar. You look amazing, by the way. How have you been?" That's right, guys. The little first grader, who was once the excited little brown-haired girl, was now a woman, and also the nurse who was taking such great care of my mother that day. The three of us stood in her room, laughing, talking, and trading stories back and forth for a good while, until Katie had to leave to get the release papers for my mother. When she walked out, though, I stood there for a moment before I clearly heard the Holy Spirit say, "Remember the promise you made me? Tell her. She'll listen to you." Another reminder, people. God will hold you at your word. He never forgets. So in that moment, I took a deep breath and told my mom that I was coming right back. I opened the door, and before she got too far down the hallway, I called out to her. "Katie." "Yeah?" she said. "Did I forget something? What can I help you with?" I took a deep breath and I started my sentence. "I need to tell you something, and you might think that this is absolutely ridiculous because it was so long ago, but I need to ask your forgiveness. You see, years ago, you and I were in the same first grade class." She listened intently as I told her the full story of everything that had happened. I finished. I let all these years go by without uttering a single word, even though we were roommates in college and the opportunity was there. I said nothing. I had to tell you now, though, because I had made a promise to God that the next time I saw you, I would say something. I'm really sorry, and I just hope that you can forgive me. We stood there for a moment in silence. I watched as she took a second to look at the floor and then back up at me. Her cheeks were red and both eyes were watery. And then she spoke quietly. Her first words, "Chrissy, you didn't have to tell me that. I don't even remember that. But my goodness, you don't need forgiveness from me. Nobody's perfect, and we were all in such a different place back then." She took a deep breath before saying, "I just wish that I could hug you." And obviously, we didn't because of the pandemic and the health protocols at the hospital. So at that moment, we just settled for air hugs. But I said to her, "Katie, You've always had such a sweet and kind spirit about you, and for years, what I had done had gotten to me in the worst way. While I knew that God had forgiven me, I just had to make things right with you too. So, through tears, her response was simply this: Chrissy, listen, I can't hold you to that. I've always thought of you the same way that you've thought of me, and this doesn't change anything. Sometimes you just have to give people a little grace when things happen. I know I've needed grace in the past, and God has been such a good father in giving that to me. We talked some more, but when I tell you guys that just like that, through tears and being able to really communicate with someone who was willing to listen, I walked out of the hospital that day feeling lighter, freer, and completely redeemed by God. Just an overall sense of liberty. He had given me a new sense of grace and what that looks like. So, to my listeners, I end today with a special request. When you find that things, situations, and circumstances have caused you a little pain, a little inconvenience, or even lots of turmoil, whether it be because of something you've done or something that someone has done to you, make room for grace and forgiveness. You never know when you'll need it in return. Well, that's all I have for today. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. God bless and take care.